This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Greece's debt crisis has shaken investors in the United States and worldwide. They worry that it could spread far beyond Greece. On May 6th, a day after huge protests in Athens, the Greek parliament approved a series of spending cuts. Greece has to cut $30 billion as part of a bailout deal with the European Union and the International Monetary Fund. The deal is for $145 billion in loans. The cuts include wage freezes and reductions in retirement pay for government workers. Critics say the austerity plan will hurt the poor especially. But Greek labor costs are high even for Europe. And Greece's public debt is equal to at least 115% of its economy. The cuts may be the only hope to avoid declaring bankruptcy. Sebastian Galli is senior currency strategist for the French bank BNP Paribas. He says other European countries delayed rescuing Greece because it was politically unpopular. Now they are paying for it. European countries promised to make 80 billion euros in loans available over the next 3 years. The International Monetary Fund promised 30 billion. The quality of Greek government debt is now rated at junk levels. The high risk has investors demanding higher interest rates, and not only on Greek debt. Portugal and Spain have also had their credit ratings reduced. Both borrowed from credit markets, and both had to pay far higher rates than Germany, the safest investment in the euro area. The euro is 11 years old and used as the currency of 16 countries. But less trust in the euro has reduced its value to the lowest levels in over a year. Sebastian Galli says growth expectations for the euro area have dropped. This has affected producers of raw materials, such as Australia, Brazil, and Canada. But he says the falling euro should help ease the crisis. He expects the exchange rate against the dollar to reach 1-to-1 within a year. That would be good news for European countries with heavy debt loads. He said, the lower the euro is, the more competitive these economies become, and, therefore, the more the fiscal concerns are going to be reduced. While the euro has fallen, the dollar has gained value. Investors, fleeing risk, have bought dollars and American debt. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Greece has approved a plan to cut spending, raise taxes, and sell government-owned assets. The approval cleared the way for $17 billion in loans from the International Monetary Fund and the European Union. The loans are a share of the $156 billion rescue deal that Greece secured last year. The money will help the government to operate and pay its debts until the middle of September. But the austerity plan led to a 2-day general strike in Greece and violent demonstrations in Athens. Several hundred protesters and police were injured. Parliament approved the plan on June 29th and agreed to the details the next day. Prime Minister George Papandreou won more support than expected for his proposals. He appealed to Parliament to do everything possible to avoid defaulting on the debts of the birthplace of democracy. There is a choice, he said. We can remain a Greece which has a huge public sector, or change to a Greece which has an effective, democratic, and productive public sector. Greece is expected to seek more international help, even though years of government borrowing led to the crisis. Many protesters said their government is making decisions that only serve the interests of wealthy nations. But other Greeks see the need for austerity. One man said, "I think the policies are a good step towards finding common ground with the European Union. I don't think any country can operate in isolation these days, especially a country the size of Greece." On June 28th, the IMF chose French Finance Minister Christine Lagarde as its new managing director. Dominique Strauss-Kahn resigned in May after he was accused of sexually assaulting a hotel cleaning woman in New York. But on July 1st, a judge released Mr. Strauss-Kahn from house arrest as the investigation continued. Prosecutors raised questions about the believability of the accuser. The IMF has always been led by a European, but Ms. Lagarde is the first woman. She received support from the United States and European nations, as well as Russia, Brazil, and China. She has promised to be a strong voice for developing countries, especially in Asia and Africa. But international monetary expert Domenico Lombardi says she can also pressure other European finance ministers to take a more aggressive stance on the European crisis. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. Continuing debt problems in Greece and Portugal. The banking crisis in Ireland. A $1 trillion deficit in the United States. These are all reasons why high levels of public debt are a big worry around the world. Countries that keep spending a lot more than they earn may not be able to repay their debts. That risk of default can make it harder and costlier for them to borrow more money. Heavy debt can also affect a country's competitiveness. Voter anger at government spending and taxes helped lead to the big Republican gains in America's congressional elections in November. President Obama says for the economy to improve, the government must cut spending and reduce its deficit. In February, he formed the National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. The two chairmen are Erskine Bowles, a Democrat, and Alan Simpson, a Republican. In November, the chairmen presented their own ideas for how to cut the federal deficit to about 2% of the economy by 2015. The administration estimates this year's deficit at about 10.5%. The two chairmen say their proposals would cut the deficit by almost $4 trillion over the next 10 years. $100 billion would come from the military. Other proposals would cut the federal workforce by 10% and freeze civilian pay. The chairman proposed to simplify the tax laws and reduce tax rates. But they also proposed to cut some popular tax breaks. One target is deductions for interest paid on home mortgage loans over $500,000. Another proposal would add 2 years to the full retirement age for Social Security, raising it to 69 by about 2075. The commission includes current and former lawmakers from both parties. Other groups are offering their own debt reduction plans. Former Senator Pete Domenici and former Clinton administration official Alice Rivlin led a task force that presented its plan. That plan aims to save $6 trillion over 10 years. It would freeze federal spending for several years, change the tax laws, and create a national sales tax. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can download all of our programs, including transcripts, at voaspecialenglish.com. And we're on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Women are on their way to holding more than half of all American jobs. The latest government report shows that their share of non-farm jobs nearly reached 50% in September. Not only have more and more women entered the labor market over the years, but the recession has been harder on men. In October, the unemployed rate for men was almost 11%, compared to 8% for women. Industries that traditionally use lots of men have suffered deep cuts. For example, manufacturing and building lost more jobs in October. But healthcare and temporary employment services have had job growth. Both of those industries employ high percentages of women. 30 years ago, women earned 62 cents for every dollar that men earned. Now, for those who usually work full-time, women earn about 80% of what men earn. And women hold 51% of good-paying management and professional jobs. Yet a study released in November said men still hold about 9 out of every 10 top positions at the 400 largest companies in California. The results have remained largely unchanged in 5 years of studies from the University of California, Davis. Also, a new research paper in the journal Sex Roles looks at the experiences of women who are the main earners in their family. Rebecca Meisenbach at the University of Missouri in Columbia interviewed 15 women. She found they all valued their independence, and many enjoyed having the power of control, though not all wanted it. But they also felt pressure, worry, and guilt. That was partly because of cultural expectations that working women will still take care of the children. Also, men who are not the main earners may feel threatened. The job market continues to suffer the effects of last year's financial crash. Now, a judgment has been reached in the first case involving charges of criminal wrongdoing on Wall Street. The government lost its case against two managers at Bear Stearns, the first investment bank to fail last year. A jury found Ralph Cioffi and Matthew Tannen not guilty of lying to investors. The hedge funds they supervised lost their value in 2007. But jurors said there was no clear evidence that they meant to mislead investors. The Justice Department continues to investigate other companies. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. German health officials announced on June 10th that bean sprouts were the cause of Europe's deadly outbreak of E. coli bacteria. E. coli infections killed at least 30 people since late May. 3,000 others were sickened. Most of the victims were in Germany. After the announcement, Russia said it will lift its ban on European Union vegetables in return for EU safety guarantees. At first, German officials suggested that cucumbers from Spain were to blame. Russia and other countries quickly banned vegetable imports from Spain and other European countries. The Spanish Agriculture Minister, Rosa Aguilar, demanded that Germany pay for her country's losses. John Dalli of Malta is the European Union's Commissioner for Health and Consumer Policy. He said a rush to judgment spreads unjustified fears in the population all over Europe and creates problems for our food producers selling products in the EU and outside of the EU. Some critics accused Russia of using the issue to try to help its effort to join the World Trade Organization. Russia is the largest economy without membership in the WTO. EU Farm Commissioner Dacian Ciolos proposed giving European farmers $220 million in aid. The goal was to help European farmers recover at least 50% of their losses. By June 8th, Mr. Ciolos had raised the amount to over $300 million. The E. coli outbreak was not the only issue troubling Europe. European governments and the International Monetary Fund were considering as much as $65 billion in new loans to Greece. Some officials admitted that earlier rescue loans were not enough. Thousands of government workers protested spending cuts approved by the Greek cabinet to reduce budget deficits. Separately, French Finance Minister Christine Lagarde continued her campaign to become the next head of the IMF. She visited China after traveling to India. Mexican Central Bank Chief Agustin Carstens was seeking to become the first non-European to lead the international lender. Dominique Strauss-Kahn resigned as IMF managing director because of charges of attempted rape of a hotel maid in New York. He pleaded not guilty during a court appearance on June 6th. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can learn American English and much more every day at voaspecialenglish.com.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. More people are able to receive higher education worldwide than in the past. But the amount of higher education is causing social and economic divisions in many countries. A recent study by the Organization for Economic Development and Cooperation, or OECD, also finds that some developing countries are making progress. 5 years ago, the world financial crisis hurt many nations, but it did not slow growth in education. The OECD report notes the quality and amount of education is increasing the division between what it calls the haves and the have-nots. In some areas, rising unemployment has affected people with lower education levels more than others. They earn considerably less than those with higher degrees. There are 34 economically developed countries in the OECD. Among those countries, the unemployment rate for people with a university education is about 5%. However, the rate is almost 20% for 25 to 34-year-olds who do not have a university degree. This situation also exists in developing economies. Andreas Schleicher is the Education and Skills Director for the OECD. He says education makes more of a difference in the life chances of people than in the past. The report finds that education makes a greater difference for individuals within countries. But it also notes that education is reducing divisions between developed and developing countries. Mr. Schleicher says countries like China, Vietnam, and Brazil are making education an important goal. He says they are investing their limited resources to get good teachers and school leaders. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.